Greetings, everybody. My name is Sean Lees, and I am the Business and Human Rights Specialist for UNDP based at UNDP Asia Pacific in Thailand. It is an honor today to host this important session on the ESG movement, the realities of doing well by doing good. We are grateful to have with us today a very, a deep panel. I like to think it was a panel with a lot of rich experience and a lot of expertise to share with us on the subject of ESG and where it's going in Malaysia. They, of course, will have a lot to say about how Malaysia is positioning itself with regards to the ESG asset class, attracting it to the country, attracting this investment to companies throughout the country as well, in all shapes and sizes. So let us, allow me to just share my screen real quick and introduce our panelists today. Today, we're going to be joined by Mr. Faisal Mohammed Yusuf, the Senior Director at the Investment and Trade Facilitation Division at the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. We'll then hear from Dr. Yeo Ken Kid, Vice President, Corporate Governance and Sustainability at Bursa, Malaysia. We also hear from Dr. Ismet Al-Bakri Yusuf Al-Bakri, Senior Manager of Corporate Governance, Securities Commission, Malaysia. And finally, Nurhaiza Jamon, Director of the Regulatory Development and Services Division at Companies Commission of Malaysia. Now, as I said, we're going to give the floor to our panelists in a moment, but allow me just to say a few things about the ESG asset class. As you well know, the growth in ESG is compounding yearly. Total value is estimated today at around $30 trillion, growing 5 to 10%, even some estimates of 15% a year on year. And yet many experts have told us that Southeast Asian companies have a less attractive ESG risk rating than those companies found in other regions. And to some extent, the forced labor environmental risks of the region are considered high and may be detracting some investments. Now, before I give the floor to the panelists, a few comments on what's been said already during today's National Conference on Human Rights, on Business and Human Rights. Edmund Bond made some closing remarks at the end of the plenary session earlier today, saying that ESG is not business and human rights. Okay, this is a business and human rights conference. He wanted to make that distinction clear because he's saying ESG is perhaps another step on the way to getting to where we really want to go, which is to business and human rights, or that as defined by the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Now, what are some differences between the business and human rights and ESG practice areas? Well, first, it is also true that ESG does not require as much as of businesses as the business and human rights agenda. The business and human rights, first of all, it doesn't focus just on risk ratings or rankings. Instead, it involves commitments and processes and procedures. And these processes and procedures need to happen in an ongoing manner. Also, business and human rights doesn't involve, sitting at the table with pension fund managers or private equity managers or sovereign wealth fund managers. It actually involves a very strong engagement with the state, with other industry leads, and with civil society and even human rights defenders. The business and human rights agenda takes a multi-stakeholder approach. So some very distinct differences between what business and human rights is asking of us, or the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights is asking of us, and the ESG asset class. Now, our program is, our Business and Human Rights in Asia program is working in about 9 different countries right now: Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, of course, Mongolia, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Vietnam. And in these settings, we're finding a wide range of approaches to ensuring that the UN Guiding Principles is implemented in their countries. I'm not going to detail today what that looks like in the different countries. It's not really apropos to this discussion on ESG investment, and it's been covered, I think, in other segments. But just for people to know that the Business and Human Rights in Asia program is supporting all stakeholders. government on policy, but also business with regards to how they can show respect to human rights. And also, of course, with civil society, giving them a greater profile, and giving voice to the most vulnerable. So we are also taking a multi-stakeholder approach to the business and human rights agenda. Now, one of the things that we do for business is to provide guidance. How can we work with business to ensure that they are doing their utmost to show respect for human rights in their operations and supply chains? This first slide here shows you a human rights due diligence training facilitation guide and the many tools linked to it. At this moment right now, in Indonesia, the top companies, 13 of the top Indonesian companies are undergoing a in Jakarta. We've also provided guidance on how to manage human rights risks in a time of COVID. This has been translated now into 20 different languages, including in Bahasa. We also do a wide range of research briefs. And in fact, very recently, we released these three in light of the Malaysia conference. We even have one on investment policies and the role of government-linked investment companies. Now, it is also very clear that there is increased scrutiny over the ESG asset class. According to the Harvard Business Review, token programs and philanthropic side projects are eroding the public's trust and inviting backlash against ESG funds. We've seen this kind of backlash or disenfranchisement, jadedness with regards to CSR projects. And of course, this follows a rather popular discontent over the direction that globalization is going. In fact, global supply chains are under increased scrutiny like never before. And there's a range or a host of different policies and laws that are coming back to help clean up operations in all regions. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with ESG, ESG is really focused on risks, and it's a term widely used in the investment community to talk about investments in companies that do well in managing their environmental risks, their social risks, and their governance risks. And under environment, we have these headings, for example, companies with low carbon emissions or doing the most to reduce carbon emissions. Under social, we have those companies doing the most to reduce forced labor risks or land rights abuses. And under governance, we have those companies that are also focused on shareholder rights, limiting unethical lobbying, and increasing board diversity. Now, there is no internationally agreed definition of ESG, but these are common headings, rather common subheadings under E, under S, under G. And of course, as you may have guessed, human rights due diligence and or human rights, the business and human rights agenda is primarily focused on the social, on the S in ESG. Now, Malaysia has not stood on the sidelines as the issues of definition and taxonomy of the ESG asset class have taken root. In fact, we're going to hear a lot more from our speakers today on the National Investment Aspiration policy of April 2021. Of course, too, there's the work of the Securities Commission on the Sustainable and Responsible Investment Roadmap, issued in November 2019. And then in 2017, of course, the Companies Commission issued its business review report. And I believe I have that here off on my slide, showing you how it, in fact, had an appendix on how to report on and how to disclose human rights risks. And then, of course, we have the from Bursa Malaysia back in 2015, its sustainability framework, which made ESG reporting a requirement for publicly or for public companies for listing in Bursa Malaysia. Of course, Bursa Malaysia also had launched its FTSE for Good Bursa Malaysia Index in 2014. So a rich array of different policies and different products, guidance notes, etc., around responsible or sustainable investing, around the ESG asset class. And of course, that squares very well with our conversation today on the business and human rights agenda and this national conference on the same. So without further ado, let's turn now to our panelists. Starting with Mr. Faisal Mohammed Yusuf, Senior Director again of the Investment and Trade Facilitation Division of MEDI. Allow me, Faisal, to ask you this very first question. Recently, the Malaysian government announced the NIA, or the National Investment Aspiration, and yet I understand that people are just getting used to it. Not enough people have heard enough about it. We'd like to understand better what this does to frame the many different investment policies that are present today in Malaysia. Faisal?
Thank you, Sean, our moderator. First, let us thank the organizer for inviting us for this opportunity for us to be part of this important discussion. ESG, environment, social, and governance, has been the buzzword which is altering how we view the world now. In particular, on what we define a good investment from a lens of various stakeholders: government, businesses, education institution, NGOs, and people from all walks of life. I hope everyone can hear me well. In this spirit, MITI is supportive of the development of National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights that is being championed by the Legal Division of the PMO, Prime Minister Office. It is timely for Malaysia to develop governments and business community to mount a concerted response towards a generational defining moment, building a holistic pathway, ESG-driven economy that cultivates a stable and predictable economic environment, including a favorable investment climates. Since the inaction of the approval of NIA by our cabinet in April 2021, MITI is spearheading the holistic reform of Malaysia investment agenda that will be premised on the NIA, National Investment Aspiration, towards a balanced economic growth with sustainable development, which are premised on five pivotal areas. Number one is to increase economic complexity. We want to ensure that Malaysia economy is increasingly built on skill-based industries, very technology sophisticated sectors with significant productive capabilities needed to create differentiated high-value product and services. This is important to allow us to unlock long-term competitive advantage. We are therefore actively seeking investment opportunities that will enable us to enhance our local R&D capabilities in the country. Secondly is to create high-value job opportunities. We seek to create higher value job opportunities for Malaysians to ensure that our people are equipped with sufficient required for the growing future economy. We are seeking targeted investment that require greater skill sets, which will catalyze our local talent capabilities. This is where the industries, academia, training institutes, and all the relevant stakeholders collaborate to have it done. Number three is to extend the domestic linkages. We intend to enhance our integration with the regional economy, extending our supply chain and empowering more local business with the tools and opportunities needed to better participate in the global value chain. We aim to unlock increased forward and backward linkages that will drive catalytic economic growth. We therefore encourage investment into Malaysia who are interested to expand across ASEAN. Number four is to develop new and existing clusters. This is where we aim to develop both new and existing clusters by ensuring facilitative business environment and streamlined policies. Industries cluster play a fundamental role in driving economic spillover, which is key in delivering holistic ecosystem benefit. We welcome investment that are interested to work together with us to continue to build our clusters. The last pillar is on to improve the inclusivity. We aim to champion equitable growth for nation by ensuring equal opportunities as well as adequate safeguard for the people. This aspiration seeks to unlock Malaysia's full potential, fundamentally lowering barriers to access as well as better integrating into the economy. We are therefore seeking investment who share the interest to support this important government agenda. All these aspirations are aligned with global developments that are also increasingly pursued by investors and shareholders. We will be working with multiple stakeholders, including the private sector, to put in place comprehensive reform and enabling policies to enhance Malaysia's competitiveness and to make Malaysia the preferred destination for sustainable and ESG-driven investment in the region. Malaysia new investment strategies and sectors will intensify high technology and innovation, which will balance economy and environment sustainability and reduce dependence on foreign labor, consistent with global benchmark in environment, social, and governance. Subsequently, NIA will also be integrated into all development strategies, especially in the preparation of the 12th Malaysian Plan, the new Industrial Master Plan, as well as aligning with the Shared Prosperity Vision 2030. I would like to also highlight that in a move toward reducing carbon footprint, Malaysia had also announced a series of low emission and green initiatives at the national, regional, and state level. This includes the enhanced National Automotive Policy in February 2020, Shared Prosperity Vision 2030, the Green Technology Master Plan 2017 to 2030, Low Carbon Society Blueprint for Iskandar 2025, and the list goes on. Nevertheless, I view that this approach should be streamlined across the nation by formulating a clear vision and plans for gradually transitioning for renewable energy production, improving energy efficiency and reducing industry and transport emission, as well fueling green economy through sustainable investment. Ultimately, this will ensure a coordinated approach toward achieving shared target and minimize inefficiency and duplication of resources. In this respect, Malaysia is positioned to expand new opportunities that are high technology and innovation driven to investment anchored on ESG. Moreover, Malaysia's rich national resources can be leveraged to position Malaysia as potential carbon trading hub in the region. Based on recent development, the government needs to be swift in catching up with other economies such as the EU, the US, China, and Singapore, which have been pivoting towards this initiative. EU carbon border adjustment mechanism by 2030, US development of carbon pricing system to achieve net zero carbon by 2050, China carbon trading scheme to reach carbon neutrality by 2060, and Singapore Green Plan 2030. Closer to home, Malaysia, government-linked company and private sector has been proactive in undertaking ESG commitments. Notable example, in November 2020, Petronas announced that it aims to become a net zero emitter of greenhouse gases by 2050. Securities Commission Sustainable and Greenhouse Gas and Responsible Investment Roadmap for Malaysia Capital Market and Bursa Malaysia partnership with FTSE Russell. Riding on this growing interest, talk on carbon border adjustment mechanism have also been deliberated at various regional and global fora, including ASEAN, APEC, and WTO. In addition, the dedicated provision related to labor and environment have also been included in mega free trade agreement, including the Regional Economic Partnership, RCEP, as well as the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP. Sustainability through ESG is the way forward for our nation across the government machinery, business model of companies, and lifestyle of Malaysians, with active involvement of non-governmental actors, including private companies, targeted financial and technical support, and effective outreach. Lastly, as Henry Ford rightly quoted, come together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success. MITI always value ideas and collaboration, partnership with the private sector, including the business community and NGOs. Together, we will continue to fuel a sustainable economic recovery and investment flows, as well as in improving the life of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal, our Senior Director from MITI. I have some questions for you I'd like to put to you later, but for now, just to remark on the many important points of the aspiration, of national aspirations, including a focus on high-value jobs, and of course, that's going to require investments in education and incubation for innovation. The linkages with local businesses and bringing local businesses into supply chains also relates very strongly with the agenda on inclusivity and ensuring that everyone has an equal opportunity there in Malaysia. These are very strong messages from media, and we're very grateful to have you open up our conversation today. We're going to come back to you, Director, here shortly. But let's, if I may, go now to our next speaker, Dr. Yeo Ken Kid, Vice President of Corporate Governance and Sustainability at Bursa, Malaysia. Welcome, Dr. Yeo.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah. And many thanks to the organizer for inviting us to share our insights. And thanks, Sean, for your question. In relation to that, about your question?
Well, I haven't actually had a chance. I was going to ask a question, but indeed, I'm just really glad to see you so well prepared. And to say, okay, so one of my questions is, it's about the sustainability framework. It made ESG a reporting requirement for PLCs. Now, tell us, I want to, and I think this happened in 2015, so we're going like 5-6 years now. Tell us how successful it's been, but maybe about some of the pushback you've received or any challenges that PLCs have faced in meeting your reporting requirements at Bursa Malaysia. Take it away.
Excellent. Thanks again about challenges and our experiences. Perhaps I would start by providing a bit of context for the audience. Bursa's sustainability reporting framework was put in place about half a decade ago. Our PLCs are now required to produce a sustainability statement in their annual report. And in this statement, we require PLCs to basically disclose 4 essential elements. The first one, they have to disclose the governance structure put in place to oversee and manage key sustainability matters. And number 2, they're required to disclose the scope of the statement, which is, put simply, parts of the company's operations that are covered by the disclosures. And then they have to identify and prioritize material sustainability matters. Now, for the benefit of the audience, whenever we use the term sustainability matters, what we mean is sustainability themes and issues. Some of those have already been mentioned by Sean. They could be economic, environmental, or social in nature. So you're talking about things like employee health and safety, human rights, anti-corruption, climate change, pollution, energy, and so on and so forth. So what PLCs have to do is that they have to tell us which themes are deemed to be material or significant. Now, this is really important because it is all based on the concept of materiality. And lastly, for the themes that they have prioritized, of course, they have to tell us how they manage these. This includes all of the processes, practices put in place, as well as perhaps indicators and targets to give an indication of how well they have performed. Now, back in 2015, sustainability was at a largely nascent stage in Malaysia. Most PLCs has just embarked on their journey towards sustainability. So one big challenge faced by them is the lack of sufficient resources as well as internal capability to undertake sustainability practices, because it's not so easy. You have to determine the kinds of processes and policies are put in place, to having individuals with the right kinds of experience, skills, and competencies, and also the kinds of data that needs to be collected and reported. So this is especially true for those PLCs that are relatively smaller in size as compared to their bigger counterparts. So they require a lot of encouragement, advice, and also assistance and guidance. So in this regard, we have actually provided them with so many different things, all of our PLCs, inclusive of a sustainability reporting guide that's really comprehensive and a set of sustainability toolkits to help them along. And also based on our experience, we have to cover the entirety of the ESG universe, because across the 900 over PLCs, there are potentially unlimited themes, if you like, in different variations, forms, and shapes within the buckets of what Sean was saying, E, S, and G. So what we have done is that we have conducted an extensive range of advocacy programs, from sustainability reporting to calculation of greenhouse gas emissions to anti-corruption measures that have benefited more than 10,000 participants who are mostly practitioners and directors of our PLCs in the past 5 years. So we also launched Bursa Sustain in 2018, a comprehensive one-stop knowledge portal for everything CG, sustainability, and responsible investment. Of course, being a human rights conference, we have highlighted a few of the pieces that we have curated and featured in the area of human rights. So Bursa also conducts an annual sustainability disclosure review exercise in order to assess the sustainability disclosures produced by different subsets of PLCs. Now, of course, as you can clearly see from the average compliance levels, being Malaysians, we are pretty good at compliance. But if you look at the quality of the disclosures, there is some room for improvement. Even so, if you look at the trend over the years, from an average quality score of less than 50%, we're very heartened to see significant improvements. And in 2020, it has gone up to 68%. And more importantly, we reassessed some of the PLCs that we've assessed in 2017 and 18, and from an average of less than 50%, the average quality now is 77%. Of course, this is not all good and rosy. There are always areas for improvement, because this is a continuous journey. So in our latest sharing with all of the PLCs, these are some of the key areas requiring improvements. We have listed 5, but one of the ones that really stand out is the setting of targets. Malaysians generally seem very reluctant to set any ambitious targets or any targets whatsoever, but they just prefer to express a simple commitment to do better. So we expect, explicit targets to be set moving forward. So this is one area that we have to really work on. So we would also like to see more explicit linkages between sustainability performance and remuneration for added accountability. And lastly, we have found a really big gap in terms of the integration of sustainability considerations into business strategies. So this is where we are, the landscape of our PLC's practices in terms of the certain areas requiring improvement. As for current challenges, we can say that PLCs are facing an ever-increasing demands and expectations by key capital market stakeholders for sustainability disclosures, better ones, in terms of quality, to facilitate assessment and decision making. So here we have 2 aspects to consider. We'd like to share this. The first one is that as our framework is inherently flexible, PLCs are free to adopt practices and disclosures that fit within their respective circumstances. There is a lack of comparability between PLCs. So this makes comparisons and benchmarking a bit difficult. So this is what we are hearing from the market. On the other hand, different stakeholder groups also demand different kinds of information to be reported or disclosed. Some are overlapping, while even those similar disclosures, they want it in different formats. On top of that, the various international sustainability reporting frameworks also demand differing sets of information to be made available. So this is a problem, a major problem, because it creates a lot of fragmentation and confusion. And separately, as mentioned earlier, we have observed some persistent gaps in the availability and quality of certain aspects of disclosure. So for example, quite a number of PLCs do not disclose indicators to show how they have performed over the years. So this needs also to be addressed. Hence, in response, Bursa is now undertaking a really comprehensive review of our sustainability reporting framework. We want to identify areas of commonality and perhaps compel disclosures of certain themes and indicators that are common across all PLCs, or perhaps specific within certain industries. This is all to enhance the overall comparability of ESG disclosures. So this is how we are trying to assist them in terms of the challenges that they're facing. We believe that this review will obviously determine the market in the area of ESG, and this will fundamentally impact the practices as well as disclosures of our PLCs in this area for years to come. So back to you, Sean.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Yo. Let's see, how do I ensure, can you take your screen down? Great. Yep. And let's see, not sure what you guys are seeing on your side. On my side, on this tiny little screen. But in any case, Dr. Yo, thank you for that. Very comprehensive, laying a foundation really well. I have a question for you with regards to the FTSE for Good Bursa Malaysia Index. But let me ask you a quick question in between though. You said, you listed a number of challenges. You're very frank about them. I really appreciate that. So does our audience, of course. You said that some of the targets that the companies are using, they're not ambitious. You also said that some companies are not showing the intention of integrating sustainability factors into their corporate strategies. Let me ask you, how do we incentivize more ambitious targets? How do we incentivize companies to actually embed sustainability issues into their corporate strategies?
Very good question, Sean. I think I said ambitious within the general meaning of setting the targets. Okay. So what I was trying to say is that if you do not have a target, then the ambitious bit won't even come in, right? Yeah. So first, there must be some explicit targets that are quantitative that should be set, so that people can see, the direction of travel. Mm-hmm. So obviously, if you have improved in your, let's say, energy use by 2%, and the target is 20%, then obviously it's inadequate. But if you improve 2% and the target is 3%, over 5 years, then it is excellent. So there must be some consistent yardstick by which people can judge your performance. Rather in absolute terms or in relative terms. So I guess part of the reason of not setting a target is because we have to be conscious of the fact that it was a phased rollout of our sustainability disclosure framework. Mm-hmm. The big boys went first towards the end of 2016. Then those that are 1 billion and 2 billion market cap between 2017, and the rest only followed suit in 2018. So can you imagine if you do not have the required activities or processes or initiatives in place yet? So number one, I feel that it is the collection of data that's a problem, because you need to have something in place for a certain period of time before you can collect the data. And number two, it is also a case of experimenting and gaining experience. So while you build your internal capabilities and all that, I'm pretty sure there are internal targets. So that's why over time, we're really heartened to see that more people are setting explicit targets, and more targets as well. Because please remember, it's not just one target, it is across all of the material themes that they have identified. So it is pretty complex. So once they get the hang of it, then perhaps of course, more targets and appropriate ones will be set. But what we're trying to say is that not no targets, but the tendency is now more often than not, there are for specific themes, there are no targets. So obviously, some of them are like diversity, they do have. But what we want obviously is something more robust and more consistent across. Because when we do our assessments, we will say for a typical theme, do we see any targets? We don't go and really count each and every one the frequency. So I guess as long as the trajectory is positive, we have to push a bit harder.
Mm-hmm.
So it is within that context, yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yeo. And also, I just want to say that it's also a function on the market. What is the market demanding with regards to reporting? It seems to me that in some cases, market is demanding different kinds of reporting, and it must be really confusing. You talked about fragmentation of reporting templates, for example. It must be really confusing to have to report against these different items, but also very frustrating to re-report the same material, but in different formats as well. I hope that the market will consolidate itself more completely with your inputs, so that retail investors, and institutional investors, but also retail investors can do that cross comparison that they need to do intelligent ESG investing. And of course, we hope that you'll stick to the definitions that you have there with regards to human rights. We hope that you put those forward as a part of the S in ESG. And I do feel confident as we move to the next speaker, Dr. Yeo, that Bursa Malaysia has the right person in the job for that. And thank you very much. We'll come back with some questions soon. Cheers. Moving on now to Dr. Ismet Yosef at the Securities Commission in Malaysia. Of course, the Securities Commission has published the Sustainability and Responsible Investment Roadmap, commonly known as the SRI Roadmap. Dr. Ismet, may I ask you to elaborate on the status and the implications of the SRI Roadmap?
Sure. Thank you, Sean, for the question. And thank you for the organizers for inviting me. It's an honor to be part of the esteemed panelists. Let me take you through a brief background on the SRI roadmap. Our journey in pursuing SRI agenda started from our periodic assessment on the development of the Malaysian Islamic capital market, given the similarities of values espoused between the Islamic finance and also the SRI. So hence, through that assessment, we recognized that there were opportunities that could be unlocked. And one of the earliest initiatives was that the introduction of the SRI Sukuk framework back in 2014, which then led to the creation of an innovative Sharia compliant SRI instrument that not just benefited the environment, but also benefited the society. And the creation of this SRI Sukuk framework has definitely shown a positive progress. Because as you can see, as of September 2021, we saw a total of 7.3 billion of SRI Sukuk that have been issued under this framework. And this includes the issuance of the world first green Sukuk in 2017. So from this development and from this progress that we had, we wanted to enhance the SRI agenda further. And in that regard, we have then developed and released the SRI roadmap in 2019 that encompasses 20 recommendations under the 5I strategy. And these 5 Is are the instruments, the SRI instruments itself, investors, issuers, internal governance culture, as well as information architecture. So the focus varies, not only focusing on just what we wanted to put forward in terms of the instrument, but looking at all other stakeholders within the ecosystem. So following the release, Sean, one of the early outcomes of the SRI roadmap was to include the revision of the SRI Sukuk framework in 2019, which we had already had back in 2014. This is to ensure greater alignment with globally accepted principle and to expand the range of eligible projects and issuers. This is technically to build the highway so that more can be done within the SRI space. With the issuance of the framework, there is now a wider range of green, social, and sustainable projects being financed by SRI Sukuk. These include, most recently, a 4 billion ringgit raised through the renewable energy project. But it does not stop there. We also saw other types of projects being funded by the SRI Sukuk, and these include green building, quality education, and also affordable housing. So it's positive to see that how the SRI Sukuk has then evolved to facilitate a greater mandate of the society and also to the environment. And in our effort to widen the range of SRI instruments, we then introduced the guidelines for SRI funds. And this is to expand the range of SRI fund products offering and to encourage the development of the SRI fund management segment in the Malaysian capital market. Although there's technically the take-up was slow at the beginning, but now we can see that a total of about 22 qualified SRI funds in the market, out of which 15 are unit trust fund, which is available and accessible for investment by individual investors. And positively, 17 funds alone were introduced in March last year. So we can see a booming of and demand in terms of SRI funds, not just by the institutional investors, but also by the retail investors as well. And speaking of demand, we are also seeing positive progress in the fund management segment. As you're aware, there are a few of our local institutional investors that are providing leadership in the SRI investing. Well, this include the EPFs, QAP, and also Khazanah. These investors are sending strong signals to the capital market, and they will consider ESG SRI aspect in their investment decision, and they have made clearly and publicly known on their preferences and stand on this matter. So Sean, these are some of the initiatives under the SRI roadmap, and there are a lot more that have been done. But all in all, I would say that we have made a lot of progress in implementing the recommendation of the SRI roadmap, with several initiatives currently ongoing. And definitely this is to support a capital market that is relevant, efficient, and also diversified. So thank you. Back to you, Sean.
And thank you very much for that presentation. Again, really strong foundation for understanding the work that Securities Commission is doing to ensure sustainable investing. We talked a little bit about integration of sustainability into the strategies of the companies, publicly listed companies, with Dr. Yeo. And I'm wondering now, with regards to the SRI roadmap, whether you have any views on how to ensure the integration of environmental, social, and governance framework within the overall governance structure and making of companies, and ensuring that, for example, boards of directors, other members, essentially the governing body of companies take these into fuller consideration. But what does the SRI roadmap say to that, and what else needs to be done?
Well, definitely the G aspect or governance in ESG is definitely a clear indication on how important governance is in the overall structure of sustainability initiative by a company. Fundamentally, board plays a pivotal role as steward of the company, and fiduciary duties that they hold encompass ensuring that the interests of the companies were protected, not just short term, but also in the long run. And looking at the fundament and looking at this is consistent with what the ESG mandate is all about, where it's not just looking at your short-termism, but also looking at how well you're going to perform in the long run. I recall a saying of Lord Dennings, which says that illustrate how important the role of board is, and where they say that technically the company is like a human body. You know, they have a brain and they have a nerve that controls what they do, and technically people in the company are those who are merely agents who technically works the hands and not represent the mind. But the directors are the one who are actually representing the mind and will of the company, and that shows how important it is, the role of directors to play to ensure that the integration of the ESG is being put together as part of the overall sustainability framework. And this duties is not left alone to the executive director, Sean. It covers both the non-executive directors as well. We have numerous case laws that clearly mention that the court is not concerned on the label, but rather it looks at who the directors are. It looks it goes beyond your title. Is actually everybody within the board must play their role to ensure the stewardship of the companies here.
We're relying on a lot of goodwill, though, aren't we? The brain and the board of directors and senior management pick the right risks or pick the right sustainability priorities. And I want to be able to confirm that with you shortly. But we did have a couple questions coming through, and I thought this might be an apropos time to just take a short pause and ask one. This one's from Andrew Ko, who asks, I'm sorry, he just asked a second one and threw me off there. Yes, is it up to every company to decide what the ESG risk factors are in relation to its business? And what if the company misidentifies or understates its risks? What consequences, if any, are there? And how would the public know? Can you give a stab at that?
Maybe I should take a stab at that.
Sure.
I think the approach to identify your material sustainability or ESG matters is much more sophisticated than years ago. You have this process of continuous engagement with your key stakeholders, be it internal or external. So there is this ongoing conversation that what your stakeholders find to be important and should be managed by the company. And the other thing is also about realization of the main impacts, be it social, economic, or environment, where your business has its footprint. So it is not something that comes out of the air and I have misidentified and that's it. It is a continuous process of refinement. I would say much more to another aspect, which is once you have identified your material matters, do you have enough resources to deal with them all at one go? Because more often than not, companies have to prioritize because of the amount of resources that are available. So the key question becomes, are you doing enough within each of the themes that are important or impactful to your company? So I would throw it back that way. I wouldn't say misidentify, but it's more to, are you factoring it enough? So a very good example, perhaps none better than climate change. So the first thing is that you need to know how climate change impacts the resilience of your business. Now, even if you know, do you have the internal capabilities, the strategies and all that to deal with those implications? I think this is the key to good ESG. The board must direct their minds of senior management as well to how they improve their practices over time. So again, we are not expecting perfection here, like problem solved. It will never be solved in that sense. It is just how effectively you factor those risks as well as opportunities that are unfolding. So that would be my response to that.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Andrew. Continuous process of refinement. It's about responding to challenges as they present themselves and also seizing opportunities rather. But indeed, it does require the boards of directors a lot of responsibility on the boards. I think
sorry, Sean, there's one more part. At least for public listed companies, they are already being subject to intense scrutiny by many segments of society and key stakeholder groups. So this spotlight is on them constantly. So I don't think if misreporting, let's say if there's any, it is done in a malicious manner, most likely no, because they take their disclosures very seriously. Because there are huge implications, obviously, on their corporate reputation and track record.
Indeed.
Yep.
Well, thank you for those comments and for stepping in. Ismet, we'll come back to you with more questions as they present themselves, and I have the help of Morris Wee there in the background that will direct me to the most relevant questions for everyone, for all our speakers. But let us move on. Ms. Nora Haiza Jamon, she is the Director of Regulatory Development and Services Division at the Companies Commission of Malaysia. Welcome, Nora Haiza. You have developed a best practices circular. Oh, let me find you. I don't know what you're seeing on your side, everyone, but I see a big picture of me and I'm not nearly, there we go. Let's pin you, Haiza. Great. That's probably better for everyone. You've developed a best practices circular on corporate disclosure and reporting. Tell us a little bit more about this circular and whether companies have really taken it on, and what's that look like, please.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Sean, for the question. First, let me thank the organizer for inviting SSM as part of this conversation. And this is extremely important topic for SSM as well. Let me put you everyone to perspective as far as business review report is concerned. So the idea was actually introduced when we repealed the Companies Act, the old Companies Act. We introduced the new Companies Act in 2016, and we introduced the business review report. The idea is simple. This is actually to encourage companies to report on non-financial matters, basically to provide a broader perspective on the company's performance, in addition to the usual mandatory disclosures relating to their financial performance. So under the Companies Act, the business review report covers 4 main areas. One is actually a fair review of the company's business, provide a description of the risks and uncertainties faced by the company. The third one is actually to provide balanced and comprehensive analysis of the performance of the company during the financial year. And lastly is actually provide information on the company's policies relating to environmental matters, such as the impact of the company's operations, policies of the employees of the company, such as the working conditions, the corporate practices in human rights, as well as other social and community issues, such as impact of the business on the local community, including human rights, whether the company has made any investment towards the local community or recruitment amongst the local community, because this actually falls back from our earlier work with regards to our corporate agenda. We promote the companies to employ the school dropouts from amongst their community. So these are all the issues that we have taken on, and we wanted that to be reported as well. The business review report is also, an expectation that companies, when they are, incorporated in pursuit of profits, they also need to behave or conduct their business responsibly. Yeah, this is not just limited to just being a good law-abiding corporate citizen, but it extends to quote unquote other responsible behavior as well. Yeah, so such as like respecting human rights, preserving the environment, and being transparent about the impact of their business and product to the environment and society at large. And because of how we place this, we expect that the board of directors, should have an obligation to sort of like communicate what are the initiatives that they have undertake in conducting their business responsibly. Yeah, so this definitely would not be covered under the financial reporting. So as such, we are actually encouraging companies to report this as part of the director's report, which hopefully will be made available to public for better informed investment decision. So when we issue our best business practice circular in 2017, we wanted to assist companies on what to report and how to report. And because as far as SSM is concerned, we have about close to 700,000 companies under our care. So we know that not all companies have the resources, not all companies have the time, nor the expertise to write the business review report. And as such, the best practice circular was issued, basically to guide them through providing them a step-by-step approach on how to actually write a business review report. So we actually, teach them how to identify the stakeholders. Ismet did mention, different stakeholders require different kind of expectation. Yeah, so we actually, assist companies to identify the stakeholders to which the policy initiatives ought to be communicated. We also provide trigger questions that ought to be considered when writing the report. So if they are able to answer those questions and translate that into report, then they would be able to actually come out with a business review report. So basically, it is actually a comprehensive guide for companies to write their business review report on their own without having to engage an external party, because we know that in our care there are a lot of SMEs, yeah, so they might not have the the time, the cost to do that. You also mentioned that we provide two appendices. One is actually on environmental reporting and the UN Guiding Principles Reporting Framework for Human Rights as well. So basically, that will actually create awareness for these companies on how to report or the policies adopted as far as environmental issues and human rights are concerned. So to your question, Sean, whether companies have taken this on, I have to admit the number has been very minimal. Although we know for a fact that there are so many companies out there that have been practicing good policies on environmental matters, for instance, on human rights, but these are not incorporated as part of the director's report as well. So perhaps it boils down to that currently this requirement is only voluntary in nature.
Yeah.
So companies themselves must be convinced of the benefit of non-financial disclosures with regards to providing them good reputations, brand names, customers loyalty, investment opportunities, and many more benefits. So I stop there, Sean, and back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Nurhaiza. A lot of questions coming in on a separate channel too about this issue though of incentives. How are we going to get more companies? You said not enough companies are taking it up, even though they're doing great work under the environmental heading, under the human rights heading. But what is required is a law requiring businesses to report accurately with directors' liabilities at stake, required to get more incentives, rather to get businesses to provide for more information on their activities, on their operations.
This is exactly the point. Whilst we want to make that this is actually a mandatory reporting, we are also mindful about the impact on business at large. The moment it becomes law, we have to actually go down and really make sure that they comply with this. So when the issue of practicality, the issue of resources, and this is actually a balance that SSM has to really strike to make sure that whilst we want to encourage them, we do not want to actually overly exert on these issues or reporting on them. So we will try to be creative to encourage them to report.
Indeed. And then, of course, that burden is especially more difficult to bear in this period of COVID-19 as we emerge now in the recovery period. I understand, too, that you've done a lot to facilitate and assist SMEs who were badly affected by COVID-19. I wonder if you could tell me more about those initiatives, briefly, if you would, and any challenges you had with regards to implementation of your initiatives.
Basically, what we have done to cushion the impact is first off, we increase the threshold of indebtedness, so that companies, won't go into, bankrupt, as soon as pandemic hit, because we know that the moment more and more companies are being closed, that will have an impact on the whole ecosystem, including the opportunity for work. So that has been done. We have increased the threshold of indebtedness. The other initiatives that we have actually done is actually reducing whatever that we could in terms of compounds that have been issued, up until 90%. So at the end of the day, we encourage everyone to fully comply, but we understand that in this difficult time, compound will just want to actually, whilst we cannot waive it, but we can actually reduce it to at least to a certain extent, reduce the burden that they are facing.
Okay, very good. And just a quick question. I have something from someone named Nicholas asking if there's a complaint or grievance mechanism under SSM.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
A general question, is it? So just
It's just it was just a yes or no question.
yes, there is.
Yes.
Definitely there is.
Okay.
Right?
And do you receive complaints about human rights abuses and operations and or misreporting or whistleblower? What kind of complaints do you get?
We not specifically on human rights, but a lot of boardroom tussles, so those kind of issues that we normally received.
Okay, thank you. Now, another question from our audience, if I may, and this is for anybody and everybody. Is it fair to say that even if a company does its most to meet all the reporting standards that are out there, and in fact sets a high bar for the industry that business is in, that even if they were to comply with all the different ESG qualifications and disclosures, et cetera, that doesn't actually mean that the company has met its obligations under UN guiding principles on business and human rights? Any reflections from the floor on this question? None of our, okay, well, Ken, please.
I think that there's so many ways to cut, this ESG pie. But generally, if you talk about frameworks, some are much more to disclosures, yes, and reporting, and some are more practice heavy, like the MSPOs, RSDOs, and all that with sustainability elements. Practice, you get what I mean? So I guess when you're trying to match a specific set of expectations, like you said, the UN guiding principles and all that. So the question becomes, does the framework that you follow actually require this as a specific criteria? You get what I mean? Because, human rights and all that and business, and it can be, again, cut in so many ways. And it ends up sometimes indicators, or sometimes it becomes a narrative about what the company has done. So I think it is much more to whether the company has expressed the commitment to adhere to these principles. So there are two things here, which is quite different. Adhering to a sustainability reporting framework doesn't naturally, yes, if so happens, all of the criteria matches perfectly somehow with the UNGPs, voila, you get magic. But otherwise, it would take the company to say, look, we subscribe to that and we aspire to adhere to that. Then only those companies you find, yep, great, they are aligned to in terms of practices and disclosures to the guiding principles. Obviously, that's the ultimate destination with all these national action plans and all that, right? So we are moving in that direction. But for now, I don't think specifically, maybe aligned. I'm not sure because there's just so many frameworks out there. It's an alphabet soup. Yeah, so that's my take on it.
I mean, I think that's a very apt response, on point. But it also brings up other questions, doesn't it? There are so many frameworks. You can almost pick and choose the framework that suits you best and allows you to report on the less salient risks, the less salient sustainability challenges out there. Not that you would, and I'm not accusing certainly anybody doing it, but it would be one approach I might take if I was, sitting on the board of directors somewhere, if only to reduce the amount of pressure and or negative press that might come. And in fact, to attract ESG investment. And I'm wondering whether there isn't, in fact, a sort of a perverse incentive somewhere out there. Like, I see that people are interested in ESG. Which framework is the right one to report on so I can attract more of that money, regardless of whether it's the most salient and or the most challenging sustainability question that I could answer. I'm not suggesting, by the way, that anyone is doing just that, but I can see that there is that incentive. If we leave it only to the market to determine the degree to which companies report on their sustainability profile, indeed their ESG profile, then perhaps that we might continue to have this problem. We might continue to have this problem where the public starts to lose a little faith in ESG. And I'm glad to have this our panelists here to make sure that the faith is kept. Let me ask you this. I want to ask each one of you, one at a time, what you would like to see in the Malaysia National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights that might actually enhance reporting on the many frameworks and or meet the requirements that are currently already in place in Malaysia. What, if anything, can a National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights provide and support? Shall we start with the National Investment Aspiration? Faisal, can I put that to you, please?
Thank you for the questions. I have a discussion with my colleague here on this the requirement, reporting requirement. Apparently, all my panelist colleague is talking about reporting requirement. I just threw the idea to my colleague, and I have come to the idea that whether the obligation is moral obligation or commercial obligation, because sometimes, because I think the big guys, yeah, they're fine. They have all these guidelines to follow. But about the other, if I'm listen carefully just now, you have about 900 plus PLCs, and we have about close to 1 million SMEs. Yeah, to balance all this, yeah, the economic value. That's why in MITI, when we look at the investment project, okay, we have the CBA, cost benefit analysis. That's very simple. What is the cost? In terms of currently, we're looking at the tax foregone against the benefit bring to the country in terms of high value job, technology. But in the future, we would like to incorporate all this, the ESG elements, yeah, because in the future, for to sell your products to the Europe, you have to comply with this ESG requirement. That is commercial. But if you leave it up to only moral obligations, quite difficult. Yeah, but I think the society is getting more awareness about ESG. Yeah, go towards green tax, renewable energy. Yeah, look at the labor rights. Yeah, many firms know that they have it's not correct to employ illegal workers, but you see, on the ground, there's still many illegal workers. But then we give them the opportunity, yeah, in the future. Okay, if you wish to employ, we simplify the process to employ to give the opportunity for the local first, and then go through the right process. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, another apt response. Let me turn to Ismet, as Securities Commission. What would you like to see? What could a National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights include with regards to recommendations to the state or to business that might strengthen your hand?
I think going back to the fundamentals of two things, which is clarity and at the same time advocacy, because like we mentioned just now, we have for listed companies, we have a suite of different groupings, sizes of companies. And Puan Haiza also mentioned for the SMEs, there's different categories of companies in terms of sizes. So we have been advocating and been talking much about the needs or the requirements of human rights, but understanding what it is all about, how companies should implement it, and how companies should protect the interests of humans is something that is very important. And to that granular detail of understanding and value proposition is required so that they can actually move beyond just a compliance mindset. to actually create this governance culture within the companies that protect the interests of our employees. Like Tom Faisal has mentioned just now, it is we have to move beyond just compliance mindset of box ticking. We need to actually allow companies to implement the actual culture of good governance, but in doing so, they need to be clarity of what is the expectation is all about, what the requirements is all about, and at the same time, it's also important to ensure that we have a strong advocacy to make sure that everyone is aligned, be it the regulators, be it the companies, and the government and civil society, so that we are speaking on one same language on this matter.
Thank you so much, Isman. I mean, two key messages there: clarity of the expectation, so that companies know how to proceed with creating that stronger culture of governance to avoid human rights impacts, negative human rights impacts, and then of course policy coherence between the different regulatory bodies, but also between different ministries with regards to what kind of behavior is acceptable and what kind of is not. And only then will we get beyond the compliance mindset. Moving right along, let's ask Ken the same question. Ken, what could we have in a national action plan that would, again, strengthen Bursa, sustain Bursa, Malaysia, and the quality of reporting, and of course the availability of reporting, etc.
I would actually echo and also extend what Ismet has just mentioned. I believe what's missing is a collective understanding and consensus. Because oftentimes in our country, things develop in little silos. We've got different combinations of ministries, civil society organizations working on different things. So for the national action plan to be truly owned by the country, number one, it must be pragmatic and workable. No use if it looks really good on paper, but when you go down to the ground and talk to the practitioners and they say, look, this is not practical, it cannot be implemented fully, then you defeat the whole purpose. And then there's also the buy-in from the very beginning, because I don't think people would like to be blindsided in a way to say, these are being imposed upon you, by the way, get it sorted. So I guess we need to have that national conversation and draw businesses big and small in. Because again, when people talk about business and the private sector, they talk as though it's just one type of creature. But you have got the smallest SMEs to the largest PLCs. Their needs are distinctive, their issues are different. So the nuances within that national action plan and how it's being carried out, the mechanisms and the channels by which it works also needs to be worked out to that granular level if you truly want a plan that's long-term, sustainable, and workable.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken. Again, key messages here on pragmatism. You fully support Dr. Smith's comments with regards to that, needing it to be pragmatic. And I like how this picture you painted of like there being these different silos of initiatives around the country, and I guess what you're saying is that to be pragmatic, we need to be able to get all these silos to stop being silos and to work together, which means that you need a national conversation, and of course a national action plan does offer that. And then acknowledging that SMEs and the larger companies, they're operating at different speeds, they have different capacities, and you're trying to provide for a regulatory framework that balances the needs and limitations of a variety of different companies. And I want to make sure that everyone has had an opportunity to answer this question, which I think for me is fundamental to our discussion today. So let me turn to Nurhaiza. Nurhaiza, can you give us a few views on the question? What does a national action plan? What should a national action plan have to ensure a stronger reporting, greater compliance on ESG, with particular focus on the S and the ESG?
SSM has been working on the issue of non-financial reporting for 5 years, and very minimal take up on that. So perhaps a more robust approach must be taken, in the sense that perhaps, there should be an indication in the National Action Plan itself, to identify certain industries that requires licensing, as a precondition for that licensing to have some degree of, business human rights commitment in that sense. So at least to a certain extent, we would be able to see that, I hear what Ken said, people do not want to be pushed, do not want to be imposed on them, but we have to start somewhere, so maybe this is actually something that we need to do, to impose, but maybe at a very minimum level, to make sure that, some action is being done, maybe perhaps, on certain industry first, vulnerable industries, so identify those industry and just address that, so that something can be materialized.
Sorry, perhaps I should clarify. I just wanted to say that, they should be engaged from the very beginning.
Of course.
So that there's consensus, and they see what needs to be done, and they agree with it, and something moves along.
Yeah. True. But we have to start somewhere, right?
True, very true.
Let me, there we go. Thank you both for that exchange. And Nurhaiza, I think one of the things you're saying is that, we've taken a voluntary approach, and you're not getting as far as you'd like, and that, to impose some commitments might be necessary. For example, the licensing stage, to ensure that company charters, I suppose you might be referring to, show commitments to preventing human rights abuses, for example. Just to provide a wider frame to this as well, of course, the European Union is close to tabling a proposed directive on human rights due diligence. Now, I won't detail what human rights due diligence is here today. I've been doing that for the last few days on a series of webinars, and we don't have time for that today. But human rights due diligence in Europe was a voluntary measure undertaken by many companies there, mostly the larger companies. But after a very extensive study, the reporting that companies were doing, it was determined that mandatory human rights due diligence would be required of European companies going forward. Now, what that's going to look like is up in the air. The directive, this proposed directive on mandatory human rights due diligence, a reporting requirement, to abbreviate it, to oversimplify it, was in fact delayed several times. The directive was delayed in part because of this, the need to balance between small and medium-sized enterprises, or companies or enterprises in one part of Europe versus another. So they're trying to also find that right balance. But the general direction is in the European market towards enforceable and mandatory reporting. Of course, I don't want to mix up human rights due diligence with reporting requirements. There are, of course, mandatory, non-financial risk directives out there that have been on the books in Europe for a long time. But without going into any further detail about Europe, we do know that European companies who are that have business partners in Southeast Asia will need to ask difficult questions of suppliers and other partners, because that's what the new regime in Europe looks like. So it behooves us all, both in Malaysia working on regulatory matters, but those of us with an eye to trade and investment issues between multiple regions, to follow what's happening at the European Union very closely, because the mandatory human rights due diligence may be a signal of other things to come with regards to perhaps a greater codification and a stronger definition and taxonomy, as they say, of environmental, social, and governance risks. Now, I have one last question, and it's from a dear friend, so I need to ask it, although I do feel that we've asked many core questions about the linkages between human rights and ESG. Let me ask a question from our Deputy Res Rep, Manon, who's very interested in impact investing. She'd like to know, are there any discussions in any of the institutions represented today about the move towards impact data on ESG? And of course, the measurements in the change in outcome that effort generates. So we're looking at impact focused companies, impact focused firms, social impact, that is, social and environmental impact. Are we building a data case and or requiring data from these companies or firms, some of which borderline non-for-profit enterprises? Are we building and or requiring data from these companies to show what impact that they're actually having? Does anyone want to volunteer an answer for that?
Maybe I should go first.
Please.
Part of the review of our sustainability reporting framework is looking at ways to compel them PLCs to report, data for certain indicators. You're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, what amount of volume of waste generated and all that. Maybe it is not the indicators that is typical to the impact investment scene per se, but in terms of environmental social impact, yes, these are some of the considerations that we are, very seriously considering, for our framework review.
Excellent. As I don't see our other speakers unmuting, perhaps this is a good time now to wrap up our conversation and reflect on some the bigger points here. And that is that ESG is still an area in which we find a lot of fragmentation. There is still a lot for retailers and institutional investors to sift through before they know, before they can compare companies, before they can really land their investments in the right pot of money, so to speak. Now, we do have on our panel and working every day, a group of people here that is taking the issue seriously because they know that the ESG asset class is growing very quickly, and Malaysia cannot afford to miss out. No country can afford to miss out on this opportunity to attract this high quality investment that's chasing down the most innovative and most sustainable companies. It also is critically important in this COVID-19 period, where expectations from the private sector have shifted significantly. Investors are looking for companies that are going to help them do well by doing good. And of course, climate change is one of the main factors that are in people's mind right now. What are companies doing to minimize their carbon emissions? But second in importance, as you've seen from the news yourself, is the issue of forced labor. What are companies doing to ensure that their operations are clean of forced labor risks? Very real bottom line impacts to be felt there as well. And of course, this all feeds nicely into a narrative that I like to play with different audiences, and that is that the business and human rights agenda is about managing risks mostly, but it also presents opportunities, and those opportunities are wrapped up in enhancing one's reputation, enhancing one's company's reputation, and or eligibility to be considered a good ESG investment. I'm very grateful to our panelists today for being here and articulating the pathway that Malaysia is on. And I look forward to learning more from the same group, perhaps in a year's time when we have the second National Conference on Business and Human Rights. Perhaps that'll be labeled as 2022, and no longer towards a National Action Plan, but on the implementation of a National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. Thank you everyone for being here today, and I believe very shortly we will either be moved to the plenary room or you can make yourself there on your own. Again, thank you very much, everyone, and have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you, Sean.